If it were possible to see through the eyes of a people who live constantly with nature, rather wonderful dimensions would unfold. I think it is fair to say that most of us see nature in an artistic sense. Its many beautiful colors, its sounds, its smells, and its shapes. Also, its intriguing moods. But for tribal man, nature means infinitely more. Over the centuries, he came to see in nature an immense source of supply, a great provider of foods and medicines and raw materials for his homes, his clothing, his ornaments, tools, weapons, utensils, and implements, and also his stockades and granaries. And in seeing nature mysteriously at work, he came to rely almost entirely upon the environment for his very survival. It is not surprising, therefore, that even to this day, he lives to a great extent in accord with nature. In fact, nature remains a vital source of supply.
Nature's world, a wide and wonderful world of sunshine and surprise, a world ideally suited for discovery and exploration. And it is in this world that children grow up. As they grow and play, children learn about themselves and about the moods and mysteries of their environment. The days of childhood are the days when children develop a harmony with the natural world around them.
Between the ages of about 3 to 5, infants romp and frolic together around the huts, and they play games such as touches and hide and seek and jackal and hounds and the various games that little infants play. But then roughly at about the time when the 2 front teeth drop out, the age of infancy comes to an end. Now there are things to be done. Now there are duties to perform. Boys function as important members of the community by tending their fathers' herds and flocks. They are also responsible for milking the cows and for making butter, as well as for frightening birds from the crops. Girls help by fetching and carrying water and firewood. As the future wives and mothers of the tribe, they are prepared for this role at an early age by caring for their younger brothers and sisters, as well as undertaking household chores and gaining experience in cooking and the preparation of food. Nature is a veritable storehouse of indigenous foods. And who could be better suited to the task of collecting than the children? Now, the little girls accompany their mothers and older sisters in collecting edible roots and bulbs and tubers, edible bark, leaves, berries, and fruit, and in some parts, edible caterpillars. But the little boys, they seem to prefer hunting for grasshoppers, locusts, and termites. And in parts of southern Africa, for example, in Ovamboland, they catch lizards, frogs, and field mice. And these, I can assure you, can be very tasty when roasted over the embers. This is the central marketplace at Sibasa in Venderland. All the food sold here is grown and gathered in the surrounding area, which is rich, fertile, and ideally suited to the cultivation of semi-tropical fruit and vegetables. A popular local food is the Mupani caterpillar, which is easily obtainable and a valuable source of protein. Snuff is popular among all tribal groups. It is usually made from homegrown tobacco, to which may be added the ash of aloe leaves or thorn tree bark, and even prickly pear. In virtually all tribal territory, the environment abounds with indigenous edible fruits. In the northern Transvaal, one of the most popular is the mupel. It has a sweet, tangy taste, and even when dry and shriveled like this one, the pips are lovely to suck. If I were to be asked to name the tree I favored most, I would find it virtually impossible because trees are so very beautiful. And yet I believe that I would nominate the murula, if only because of the abundance of fruit it brings forth year after year so very faithfully. And then there is the matopi. My old friend, the matopi. It always looks so sad, so very gnarled and battered and bent. The matopi grows in profusion in all parts of the Kalahari Desert and other parts of Botswana. Its roots extend deep into the ground and they are edible. And the desert nomads dig deep into the soil around the stem and break off wedges of roots which they pound into a pulp, put out to dry, and when this has dried, they make a meal out of it by grinding it and then add curdled milk to make the most palatable porridge. Undoubtedly, the best known of all indigenous fruits is the murula. Not only is it widely eaten, but it is used for brewing a most potent alcoholic drink. The pips of the murula are interesting. They are broken open, and the inside is beaten into a pulp and then heated, and the oil extracted is used for cooking. In the Kalahari and parts of the Namib Desert and other dry regions in the west, the most popular of all indigenous melons is the little tsama. Now, in the summer, when it is picked in large quantities for day-to-day consumption, it is green and striped with creamy white. But in the autumn, after having been stored for some considerable time, it turns yellow like this one. The tsama is not particularly palatable. In fact, I find it rather bitter, very much like some of the berries and the fruits that one finds in the desert. Perhaps that is why it is such a wonderful thirst quencher, apart from being an excellent food.
The tsama is symbolic of the way the desert gives up its secrets and its roots. But before man can partake of the desert's storehouse, he has to seek out and identify its foods. It is not like this everywhere. In some places, nature is abundantly generous and offers a readily available supply of food and nourishment.
Tribes living along the southern African coastline can reap the harvests of the sea. Here in the Transkei, the women regularly collect mussels, oysters, clams, and other creatures from the rocks. fish is relished, except, of course, among the tribes who live in the Kalahari, Namib, and other desert regions, where river or sea creatures are unknown to them.
In the acquisition of food, there is also adventure. Boys can transform an everyday duty into a game, a challenge, a competition. The world becomes a veritable classroom. Childhood is, after all, a time for learning, a time for laughter, as well as a time to become useful members of the community. So, some foods are easily obtainable and equally easy to prepare, but others have to undergo a process of manufacture. One such commodity is beer, the brew that forms one of the most important and popular aspects of a traditional diet.
The brewing of beer in a tribal society is an activity which continues throughout the year. No family likes to be without beer, especially as tradition dictates that it is a must when relatives and friends come to visit. Now, beer is made traditionally from sorghum, and in more recent times from maize. But whether made from sorghum or maize, it is highly nutritious with a high yeast vitamin content. It has large quantities of roughage, and because of its relatively low alcohol content, it can be drunk more frequently and in larger quantities than other more potent drinks which are made, say, from the fruit of the marula or from the sap of the usundu or ilala palm. This is a brewery for traditional beer in Venderland, an important section of Chief Nchumbufe's royal village, and his brewery's been in existence for some 40 years. Maize forms the basis of beer production in the Transkei's Bomvanaland district. In fact, it is becoming the most widely used ingredient throughout southern Africa. Once the dried husks have been soaked, they are tightly bound in straw and stored away for a few days. During this period, they begin to sprout. And in this way, a yeast is formed, which will eventually cause fermentation in the beer. This is crushed and mixed with dry, ungerminated husks to give the mixture extra body and roughage. Now a lengthy process of boiling and stirring, producing a thick liquid that is eventually allowed to cool for a while. This is transferred to a barrel and left for approximately 2 weeks, where the mixture slowly ferments to maturity. Here it acquires the tangy, sour taste that is characteristic of the brew. Pouring it through a woven strainer removes all traces of dirt and impurities. Incidentally, the strainer is handmade from grass or reed. And there it is, the finished product, beer, the brew relished by tribes everywhere, an important and integral part of man's diet and his lifestyle. When people say there's no food in the home, this actually means there is no maize. Such is the importance of maize in the diet. There are many tasty dishes made from maize. For instance, boiled or roasted maize on the cob, nkobe, which is the harvested grain boiled soft, ngush or stamped maize, and machel, a most refreshing non-toxicant beverage. Most widely enjoyed is the stiff maize porridge, which is eaten with milk or gravy or just on its own. Whereas the tribes are essentially tillers of the soil and planters of crops, in the minds of men, they are first and foremost cattlemen. Now, in tribal societies, cattle breeding means far more than an occupation. It is in actual fact part of a way of life which reaches right down to the heartstrings of men. As one old man told me one day in Swaziland, and I thought it was rather beautiful the way he put it to me. He said, "How can you ever understand the love that we blacks have for cattle if you've neither felt the pangs of sorrow nor experienced the real joy that this very special brand of love delivers to one?" Cattle provide him with butter and milk, and to a certain extent with meat. Now, I say to a certain extent because usually cattle are slaughtered only on very special occasions. An initiation ceremony of a young Xhosa girl, the Intonjane. A cow enters prominently into the proceedings. The girl's father provides it not only as a source of food for the many guests, but also with its ritualistic significance in mind. But of course, its flesh will be considered a treat for the guests. The skins of cattle are used for making items of clothing and for making ornaments and bags and mats and shields, and also thongs and drums. The horns are used for making receptacles, and the dung has many uses. During the days, the maidens go out into the fields and bring back sacks of cow dung, which they pack in mounds. But this mound is solid, and so pieces are hacked out of this and then taken into the fires. But perhaps the most important role, after fuel, that cow dung plays is the plaster it makes when mixed with clay or with anthill. Once again, the children make their contribution because it is mainly the young girls who are responsible for the repair and upkeep of the village courtyards, which are often in immaculate condition. Cattle are invariably used as a form of payment for fines or levies in the tribal courts. They also serve a vital role in marriage, forming the basis of lobolo, or bride wealth, which is transferred to a maiden's father by her husband-to-be. In a nutshell, then, tribesmen are intensely fond of their cattle. No wonder when they sit in the hutla, or gathering place, they invariably speak about their herds, and they will be talking about the fertility of their cows and the condition of their oxen and the number of calves recently born and those yet to be born. And this is reflected in the fact that although Kraal patriarchs are fully aware of the condition and the economic value of their herds, they read into cattle an extra dimension. It is a social and religious one, not only to their own benefit, but to the benefit of their dependents, their relatives, and of course their friends.
In many areas, the land has been seriously overgrazed by large herds of cattle and goats, and this has resulted in soil erosion. However, much has been done to combat the problem by way of more efficient farming methods.
Acceptance categories, gentlemen, is not only determined by the length of time which is taken from awareness to acceptance. This, of course, is determined mainly by the community's resistance to change.
We're coming to this side.
Traditionally, cattle have always been seen as the measure of a man's prosperity. The larger the herd, the more prosperous the owner. In fact, today, the accent is on quality rather than quantity, as far as cattle and food production are concerned. For the little herd boys, dusk means a time to relax, to reminisce about the day's events, to enjoy friendly companionship. But still, the process of learning continues. And in a tribal society, there are other very important aspects to growing up.
Now, both boys and girls have to learn the dances and songs of their age groups. And they play games and are treated frequently to folk tales narrated by their grandparents. They're also made very much aware of such qualities as respect for their elders, as obedience, courage, and generosity. Discipline and authority, cultural heritage. This is where man's attitudes and aspirations strike root, and where he is imbued with the very essence of his identity. As they enter adolescence, many school-going boys and girls tend to look upon some of the age-old rituals and ceremonies as belonging to the past and not to their era. And I've found young boys and girls who enter half-heartedly into some of these activities, especially if they find themselves grouped with rigidly traditional or pre-literate age mates. And in extreme cases, they tend to look upon their involvement as a little infradik.
The people who live in Africa, are called, yes, Patrick?
Childhood and learning. This scene is typical of Africa's insatiable thirst for knowledge. Even in the remotest tribal areas, enrollment statistics continue to increase year after year. New experiences, new challenges, requiring adjustments and a change in traditional attitudes.
Now, obviously, parents are proud to have children at school. And in recognizing their changes in attitude, they are generally philosophical about the matter. This is why, in some parts, boys and girls attend initiation lodges not on a full-time basis, but in the evenings and over weekends and during the holidays to avoid missing school. Now, when I look back over the years and I recall how customs have changed and even vanished, I cannot but feel a little nostalgic and sometimes a little sad. But there's one thing I do know, and that change is an ongoing process, and it must be recognized and fully understood as a natural development fundamental to humankind.